Hey guys, this is a video on the calories in, calories out debate. This is one of those things that the internet has made into an us versus them thing, an A or B, plus or minus, right? Like, does it work or doesn't it? What I want from this video is to give you the full picture. My objective is that when you come out of this video, you know how to understand the debate, understand the theory and the science behind it a little bit, and know how to apply it in your life. So that when somebody comes and tells you and talks to you about calories or not, and quality of food versus quantity of food, you're equipped and you know how to respond, and you also know how to act and behave in your life, in your nutritional life, right? And how to use this knowledge to your advantage. So that's the objective. It's an ambitious objective. I think we'll get it done. So let's get right into the thing. Everything. The history of the human race starts with the law of conservation of mass, which states that in any chemical reaction, mass is conserved. So it's neither created or destroyed, it just transforms from one state to the other. So let's say we have a pound of this material divided by the acceleration of gravity. We do a chemical reaction and we end up with a pound of this material still, but maybe in different states, right? Like it becomes a gas, it becomes like some kind of energy, but the material is that the mass doesn't change. The input mass and the output mass is the same. It's just transformed. The second thing you should know is the law of conservation of energy states, which states the very same thing. So if you have a chemical reaction, the input energy versus the output energy remains the same. There might be some transformation there, but energy is neither created neither destroyed, it just transforms, right? So you might be asking yourself, why is Juan telling me about these two things that are the same? And why are these two things the same? They sound like they're the same, that they're not the same. One is energy, one is mass. What happens here? The cool thing, and you probably didn't know this, is that Einstein, next to this very famous formula for special relativity, proved like energy and mass are kind of the same thing. You can turn one into the other. So the law of conservation of mass is the same thing as the law of conservation of energy, which means that either mass or energy are preserved, they're never created or destroyed, and so on. So this is the basics of physics, right? What we're talking about is, and this is the basics of calories in, calories out. What does this mean in plain terms? And don't worry, I'll take it to food in a second. In box terms, this means that if you have a box like this one, and there comes this little cute dog called Augie and puts 3 pounds on the box, and then comes this awful dog called Cat and takes 2. Well, the initial mass was 3, the output mass was 2. There's 1 pound that is there somewhere. Well, it has to be in the box, right? Like you have 3 here, 2. It's in the box. It doesn't go anywhere. It just doesn't disappear, right? It stays there. That is the in very, very doggy terms, the law of conservation of mass. Sorry, I know, super high math. Let's talk about it in food terms. In food terms is the following. Let's say we have Mario, who is not an Italian chef, is a Colombian chef. And just because he's making a pizza doesn't mean he's Italian. Just because his name is Mario doesn't mean he's Italian. Racist people. Okay, so let's say that Mario eats 1 pound of pizza, right? And that's a lot of pizza. But that's all he eats in a day. Nothing else. That's what he puts in his body. No water, no liquids, no nothing. Just 1 pound of pizza. Let's say we measure his weight. So now once the pizza is in, the weight of Mario has gone from whatever he was weighing before plus 1 pound, right? Like that's it. And then we measure how much did he poo, right? Like we weighed his poo and we measure how much did he pee. Hold on, this is gonna get nasty. And then we measure the farts, like how much the gas of his farts weigh. That's hard to measure, but we can. It doesn't matter. And then we measure the speed that comes out of his mouth. And then we measure the tears and sweat that he, like expelled when he was eating that pizza. That was hard work. It's a fucking pound of pizza. And then we measure the nails that he cut and he threw to the garbage. And then we measure the boogers that came out of his nose when he was trimming his stash, which he also trimmed. So we measure all the hair that he lost, and we weigh on that thing, and then we measure the blood. There's more tears. Okay, we measure more tears. He cried again because he was watching Netflix and he got very sad. Then we measure the blood that this stupid mosquito beat from him and took it out. And we measure all that thing, and on top of that, because there's a Smarty Pants follower that says like, yeah, and you have to measure also the energy that he expelled by just living and moving, right? Like we measure and weigh, and like that energy, because thanks to Einstein, we can measure it as mass, how much does it weigh, right? Like, so now we measure, right? Like we have weighed all the outputs and we have measured the inputs, and so we say like we put a pound in, and he pooped and peed and all that thing, half a pound. So if he pooped half a pound, and like plus all the other things, and he ate 1 pound, well, the remaining pound didn't go anywhere. It stayed with him, and so naturally it went into his nose, and he grew curly hair all of a sudden. Anyhow, he is heavier by half a pound. That is the law of conservation of mass, right? You put one pound, you measure everything that comes out, and where did the difference go? It didn't go anywhere. It stayed inside Mario. So he gained pound. On the other hand, if we realize that like all the things here, all the nasty things that he pooped weigh more than the pound of pizza, then Mario becomes this emotionally unavailable slim dude that doesn't even have a smile, right? And so he lost weight. That is, in food terms, the law of conservation of mass, which people call calories in, calories out. What happens is, it's very evident when you're like talking weight. If you put more weight, if you put weight in and less weight come out, that weight stays with you and you're like, I gain weight. But some Smarty Pants said like, remember the Smarty Pants that said like the thing about the energy there on the outputs? The same Smarty Pants said like, okay, well, it's hard to measure if you're measuring like the weight of that pizza and the outputs as energy, like that's confusing. So why don't we measure both sides of energy? And we can do that because as at the end we know that energy and mass are kind of the same thing. So we end up, instead of saying, like if you want to gain weight, poundage in and poundage out have to be different, and you have to be putting less poundage that you're getting out, of course. We end up saying like, let's talk about calories. Just because there are some processes that don't turn into poop, but they turn into movement or heat or sound, right? Like into forms of energy. And so that's why we ended up with the calories in, calories out, instead of pounds in, pounds out. That is, in food terms, the law of conservation of mass, which people call calories in, calories out. And is that if you put an input and you put an output, whatever difference, either stay in the body or left the body, and that's it. It's very simple, right? Like, if you're a person losing weight and somebody tells you like what you need to lose weight is to make sure that you eat less than you poop, you will be like, yeah, thank you, that's awesome, and also evident. And the calories in, calories out law is evident, absolutely. And is not just the principle of thermodynamics that like most people will say, is the law of conservation of mass and energy, which is like at the base of physics, right? And so it's very, very evidently true, is what I'm saying. So if you look at the box example, that's all that is saying. And when people say that calories in, calories out don't work, they're not. This is not the case. They mean something else, but Or they might be not. I don't know. There's people that believe that the earth is flat. Problem is not the truth or the validity of calories of the equation. The problem is what we do with that. The problem is always how humans behave. And how humans behave is the following. They say like, duh, this is obvious. So if I need to lose weight, I need to eat little, move more, poop more, sweat more, trim my stash, get bitten by a lot of mosquitoes and drinks a lot of music so I get a lot of boogers out. And that is it. Duh, simple. I take the inputs, keep the input very low, increase the outputs, boom. What's the problem? What is wrong with that? With everything. That duh, there's a lot of assumptions. There's assumptions like the inputs and the outputs are independent. Their assumptions that all inputs are processed equals, and their assumption that calories are measuring all the same thing. So there's all these assumptions behind it, behind that duh, that I want to explain because that's where the problem is come. It's always in those assumptions. So let's go through them. First example, let's say Mario eats 100 calories of steak versus Mario eats 100 calories of Coca-Cola, right? So what happens? Well, the first thing that you should know is like, okay, let's start with the steak. So let's say that dude eats the steak, okay, and the steak goes into his stomach, and the first thing that happens is that his stomach has to work like crazy to break all the proteins, right? Like to break the bonds between proteins and to try to break those proteins into amino acid bonds, into amino acid blocks, right? And so there's a lot of processing. Then it goes into the intestines, and pretty much same thing happens, but there's more breakage and so on, right? And so have to work very hard. And all that process of like breaking that has an energetic cost. So of the 100 calories that I put in, I am having to spend 20 calories just in processing. So the net that is actually coming in for this piece of steak is 80. And that is an optimistic approximation. Usually it would be more like 70. But anyhow, so there's a cost of processing that meat. And so how many calories does Mario really get? Only 80. The Coke is gonna go right into the stomach, and the stomach is like, this is sugar, man, I don't have to do anything with this. This is almost already like done. Go to the intestines, and the intestines do their job, whatever. And there's still a cost of processing that, but it's way lower. It's just 5 calories. So of the 100 calories that Mario got from these two things, on the steak, he really is getting 80. Coke, he's getting 95. Same input, but the input determine an output here, right? And so inputs and outputs are not independent. I cannot treat them as independent things, right? So that's the first thing. So the second thing is for the smarty pants out there that might be saying like, yeah, Juan, but you were comparing carbohydrates with protein, and that's very different, and you are right. And so I'm bringing you here an example of two mostly carbohydrates foods. So one is white rice and one is kale. So let's say we give Mario 100 calories of rice, 100 calories of kale. And the problem is very similar. And the problem comes in this case from something different. And it's that rice, 100 calories of rice has 1.6 grams of fiber. Fiber are carbohydrates that your body doesn't use for energy. Right? That's like, think about like the branches of the tree, of a tree, right? Like the body will use the leaves, but the branches like they're not processed. They go into the intestines and they're not processed for energy. However, half of that fiber stays in the body and feeds the bacteria of your gut, which you need to be very healthy and awesome. And the other half, it makes your poop gorgeous. And so from the 100 grams of rice, 100 calories of rice, 1.6 grams were fiber, 0.8 stayed inside Mario feeding his bacteria, his gut bacteria, and 0.8 became poop out. With kale, 16 grams is fiber. You heard that right. So that means that 8 grams of that fiber are gonna stay feeding the bacteria and 8 are gonna become poop. So again, the inputs and the inputs determine the outputs, right? And one thing that you could say that you have to be careful is like a lot of people will like consider that fiber, because it's not metabolized into calories, is not having an effect on your body weight, but it does, because half of it actually stays in your body. It doesn't turn into energy, but it stays in your body. So it means it's inside your body. So it means it weighs. In this case, in the case of kale, it will be 8 grams. Not much, but you know, it stays there. In this example, you have 2 carbs, same caloric content, different outputs, right? Like, so it's not just the type of macronutrient that determines the outputs. There's a lot more there. There's the amount of fiber involved, the amount of minerals, and so on. So as you can see, the complexity starts growing, right? Like, it's not just inputs versus outputs. But let me complicate things a little bit more. So our third example is pretty awesome, and this comes from the guys at Stanford University, the Mind and Body Lab. You probably have heard me talking about this if you have followed me long enough. We're gonna do this experiment. So we're gonna give our guy Mario here 2 different shakes, and the first shake we're gonna give him this banner, the indulgent shake, and we're gonna tell him like it's full of all the good stuff, chocolate and it's very, very indulgent, it's awesome. And then another day, and we're gonna measure what happened. And then another day, we're gonna give him this healthy shake, this green shake. It's like super good for you, super healthy, man. It has all the macronutrients, phytonutrients. It's organic, it's homeschooled, believes in science, it listens to indie rock on Spotify. Yes, it's amazing. Reads David Foster Wallace and fucking Robert Musil. It's just amazing. It just made you smarter. But it's super healthy, right? Again, it's super green. We gave Mario these two shakes, and we measure what happens. But we don't tell Mario what's the calorie content. What will happen, what we'll do without him knowing, is that they're actually the same shake. We're just changing the color and the marketing. We're gonna give him the same exact shake. 100 calories, same ingredients, just change the color, the packaging. And we measure what happens. And what these people in Stanford University discover is that Mario will produce on average 3 times the amount of ghrelin when drinking the indulgent shake than when drinking the healthy shake. So just the anticipation that you're gonna eat something very caloric makes you, like, just that the fact that you think that makes your body have a different hormonal reaction. This ghrelin hormone is the hormone that tells your body how to deal with the food that is coming. It amps up your metabolism to like deal with that. It's like, okay, dude, we just eat so much. We're gonna have to like bring insulin. We're gonna have to deal with this, and that has an effect, right? Like, the faster your metabolism does that, if your muscles are full of sugar, then the sugar that is in the bloodstream, your body like, oh fuck, okay, we need to turn that into fat fast. We don't like sugar in the bloodstream, and so on. In the other case, in the healthy case, it's more like chill. It's like, okay, man, it's alright. Like, give you time to process this, take your time, whatever. And so this is a case in which not the inputs have not an effect on the outputs, but what you think of the inputs have an effect of the outputs, right? Like, so yet one more example in which you cannot control the 2 sides of the equation, of the calories in, calories out equation independently. So that complicates things. And my last example, and this one is the most problematic, is the adrenal fatigue example. One thing that we know is that the vast majority of women that have hormonal disturbances or imbalances, it comes from exercising too much and eating too little. Right? Like, is when you try so hard to mess with the outputs here, you end up messing with the system, right? Like, and the system makes you need to eat differently, right? Like, so the outputs, right? Like the amount of exercise that you're putting also determines the inputs, right? Like so it's this cycle of things, right? Like it's never two things alone. It's just this complicated thing in which all that is happening is interconnected, right? So we cannot separate it. We cannot say like eat less, poop more. Apart from that, there's all the other things, right? Like for example, that if you put your body in a place of deficit, your body has a mechanism to deal with a caloric deficit that is brilliant, that is to save fat. Think about it. Like if you are always hungry, your body like, oh man, we have to save energy, otherwise how are we gonna survive? Destroy muscle, accumulate fat. So that's why a lot of people that goes into like super intense exercise with low caloric input ends up gaining weight, mostly in the form of fat around the belly, right? And so just that's just one example, but there's so many things going on that in the calories in, calories out debate excuse me, that in the calories in, calories out debate gets lost, right? Now, important disclaimer, at no point of this discussion the equation or the law of conservation of mass or energy is not true. At no point. It is always true. It just means that we cannot separate things. It just means that we cannot look at inputs and outputs independently from each other, because in between there is this machine that is a psychosocial biological machine called Mario that determines how the inputs relate to the outputs, right? And so that is the whole thing. That's the whole point, and that's the main problem of the debate, is that like there's a lot of true in both polar like both polar positions, but also there's a lot of ignorance and there's not understanding that there's a lot of things we have no idea. I mean, most of these we have no clue of what's going on. I'll be honest with you, we don't really understand very well how girdling, the hormone that I was telling you about, the nerds in Stanford, works. We know how it does more or less, but very little, right? Like, so there's a lot of ignorance there, and there's a lot of misinformation too, right? Okay, but let's go and talk about how to do this. How is this useful to you? And let's land it, right? Like, so I told you we were gonna start very simple, gonna complicate things, and now we wanna see how to land this, how to make it work for you. So let's start with what we know. What we know is the energetic cost. Remember the toll from the meat versus the Coke. The energetic cost of eating whole foods is a lot higher than that of eating processed foods, right? Like, so if you're mostly eating whole foods, that means that like less calories are gonna come in, and that means that you're probably gonna need to eat more. So if you're a person that passed from eating Pop-Tarts and cereal and pizza, you pass to eating whole foods, if you're eating more or less, like the same amounts as guided by your by calories or by your feeling of satiation of how much, you're gonna end up putting less calories, just because the cost of processing that is so much higher that like there's already a deficit there. So that's one part. One thing that we know for sure that is important is that non-processed foods have a lot more nutrients, and one of the parts of the equation here is that the food itself is not just its caloric content, it's the nutrients that it brings. And so remember that Mario has to be a healthy human being so that like the processes are good, so it needs nutrients. Not having nutrients is not a good thing, so you cannot disregard quality. You have to look at it just because your body needs that to function properly. Point, and this one is important, nutrient labels are a lot more accurate for processed foods. So the more processed your food is, the more accurate the nutrition facts label is going to be. That is super interesting, and people might be counterintuitive, but like if a bag of Pringles says 100 calories, that is most likely right. Those 100 calories are gonna go in your body. if a pack of beef says 100 calories, that's most likely wrong. Like it might be just like really like real net calories is gonna be like probably 80 or 70, right? And so the nutritional labels of processed foods are way more trustworthy. So this means that if you are counting calories and that's your method, processed foods are gonna be easier. I'm saying that with heavy on my heart, but it's the truth. I cannot fight the truth. Last thing that we know is that quality and quantity matters. They both matter. Like you cannot say that one is more important than the other. They're both important. And think about it for a second. It's just like that's a conceptual separation. We cannot separate one from the other. One last thing that I didn't have here in my slide, but I would like you to know is that think about it this way. When you don't process the food, right? Like when you're eating whole foods that are less processed, those processes have to be done by you, and so that has an energetic cost. And when the food is processed somewhere else, that energetic cost, you put it somewhere else. Again, energy is neither created nor destroyed, it's just transformed. So the energy of processing is gonna be either like your body does it or it's done somewhere else by a machine, right? Like so that's what happens there. The problem is that in industrial processing there's nutrient loss. It's kind of that simple too. Anyhow, so that's what we know. So let me tell you how to use counting calories, because it can be a very useful tool. So the first thing is that before you start using calorie counting as a method for you, you have to make sure that you have and this applies to everybody following this, you have to make sure that your nutritional needs are met, not just in caloric terms, in terms of balance of macronutrients and micronutrients, right? Like, so before you count calories, is more like you should be like focused on like whether you want to gain weight or lose weight or whatever it is. You should be focusing on like, what does my body need to thrive right now? Am I eating enough protein? Am I eating enough vegetables? Am I eating enough carbohydrates? Am I eating enough fats? And how the quality of that first, because once your body is functioning properly, then we can start optimizing your weight, right? And so that's the first thing. But then let's say you're there and now you're gonna count calories. What do? You create a consistent baseline. So that means you're gonna be eating mostly the same kinds of foods pretty regularly. Why do we need that? Because there's a lot of variance between types of foods, right? Like, so, like apples can say 80 grams of calorie if it's 80 calories if it's this a Fuji versus like another one. And so what we need is, because there's so much, the inputs determines the outputs, we want to create a set of inputs that we kind of manage. And so you're gonna eat pretty much the same kinds of foods all the time. You're gonna become a little bit of a machine there. And I want you to keep doing that for at least 3 months when you're eating pretty much the same things all the time. In the same amount of quantities. And once you have created that baseline, once your body has adapted to that amount of quantity and quality of food, then all you need to do is cut the quantity a little bit. And by quantity, I don't mean like thinking about calories, and just eat a little less if you want to lose weight, or eat a little more if you want to gain weight. And you're going to do that by eating the same foods. That is fundamental. So even if you wanted to do this with like processed foods, you totally can. That actually will be the easiest case. Just make sure that your nutritional needs are met, and quality is not gonna be that high, but like you can be smart and take multivitamins and so on, right? But if you create that baseline and then increase, because the inputs are pretty much the same and we're just messing with one of the variables and not all the other ones, right? Like we're not changing from a steak to a Coke. We're not doing that. We're just like, instead of drinking 3 Cokes, you're doing 2 regularly. The psycho-social machine here, Mario, reacts in a different way, right? And so if you're gonna count calories, you need to create a consistent baseline, and you need to do a change that is consistent. And the problem is that you're gonna have to stay there. But like, that's how that works, right? Like that's the main thing. So if you're counting calories, this is the way to go. How to use the calories in, calories out concept without counting calories, and you can, right? First, the base should be the same, right? Like the base of what I was saying before is what matters. Like you want to be covering all your bases. But the second is you're gonna focus on nutrient dense, high quality non-processed foods. The more you can do that, the better. Why? Because the energetic cost of processing is that is so hard. You're gonna only eat when you're hungry and not nowhere else, right? And you're gonna stop before fullness or after fullness, depending on your goals. And by doing this, you're gonna be managing pretty accurately and pretty well the caloric inputs, right? Like, so you're not gonna have a lot of control over the numbers, but you're gonna have a lot of control of how much your body is, and you're gonna have a lot of control on the energetic cost of processing all this, right? And so this is the way to do it. So without counting, you're gonna have to rely on your behavioral things, right? Like, so only eating when you're hungry is a hard thing, because there's a lot of currencies in your life that are by the clock. Like, I eat at 9, but if that day you're not hungry, you're not gonna eat, right? And so you're only gonna eat when you're hungry, and you have to be very careful and slow and conscientious about eating before stopping before fullness, and that requires that you eat slowly and that you pay attention to it, right? Like, so eating in front of the computer, no matter if you're doing high quality foods, is not gonna work very well, right? Like, and that is gonna keep the inputs of the equation very controlled, and it's also gonna add that the processing cost of the toll is gonna be very high, right? And so that's and because you're eating before fullness, you're automatically doing less than you were before, right? Like, you're eating less than you were before, and that's all that matters, right? And so you also want consistency, right? Like, you also want consistency in terms of quality of foods, types of foods, time, but you don't need to count calories. And both sides of the spectrum work. They are different approaches, and there's 700 approaches in between. There's mixes of them, right? Like, I'm just presenting you the simplification tool, and like, kind of polarizing the thing a little. But that will help you and do this. Anyhow, if you have questions or if you need help with this, shoot me an email, write a comment in here. Like, I'm here to help, and I am more than happy to run an experiment with you. And so, yeah, just let me know. I hope this video was very useful to you, and if it is, share it with one of your friends, your mom. Don't send it to my mom. She probably has seen it 7 times already. Or send it to her. Like, you'll make her day. Anyhow, subscribe. Whatever. Thank you.